I used to think my silence was my best gift. When I was little, silence was how I survived inside my parents' house. My father's voice was like a hammer. Loud, sudden, always looking for something to break. My mother was the echo of that hammer. Not as sharp, but repeating every strike until it felt like the walls themselves were punishing me. So I learned to become quiet. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of fear. The kind that makes you tiptoe, hold your breath, and read every movement in a room like a soldier scanning for traps. When I was 7, I discovered that if I brought home perfect grades, the hammer didn't fall so often. My father liked to show my report cards to neighbors, puffing his chest as though he had written them himself. My mother would nod with a satisfied half-smile that never quite reached her eyes. And so I became perfect. Or at least I tried. I woke before sunrise to study, memorizing entire books just to make sure I never stumbled. At school, I was the one teachers pointed to when they wanted an example. At home, I washed dishes without being asked, folded laundry in military lines, and swallowed my own tears whenever I felt invisible. But perfection is a dangerous cage. The more flawless I tried to be, the more cracks appeared inside me. I didn't know it then, but each gold star, each compliment, each good job, that wasn't for me but for their pride. It chipped away at who I really was. And somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "If you ever stop being perfect, they'll stop loving you." I believed that voice with all my heart. The first time I realized perfection wasn't enough was the night of my 13th birthday. My classmates had sung for me at school, and for a moment I let myself feel special, like maybe I really mattered. I carried that tiny flame of joy home like a candle cupped in my hands. But when I opened the kitchen door, the air was heavy with the smell of burnt meat and my father's anger. He was shouting about money, about bills, about how nothing ever went right in this family. My mother stood by the stove, arms crossed, her face shut like a locked door. I waited for a pause, then held up my report card. "I got the highest marks again," I said carefully, my voice trembling. I thought maybe this would save the evening, maybe it would remind them I was worth celebrating. My father barely glanced at me. "Good," he muttered. "That's what you're supposed to do. Don't expect applause for breathing." The words hit me harder than a slap. My mother didn't even look up. She just stirred the pot as if I weren't even there. That night, in my room, I stared at the ceiling and felt something inside me crack. I wanted to scream, to throw the papers out the window, to stop being their trophy child. But I didn't. I folded the report card neatly, slid it into the drawer with all the others, and went to sleep with tears soaking the pillow. From then on, the applause in my head stopped. Every achievement felt hollow, like clapping in an empty theater. And yet I couldn't stop. I kept performing, kept chasing their approval, because the thought of losing even their cold, distant version of love was unbearable. But deep inside, another voice began to grow. One day it whispered, "You'll see the truth." I was too afraid to listen. By the time I turned 16, my whole identity was built around what I could prove. Perfect exams, polite smiles, staying invisible when my father drank too much, staying useful when my mother needed someone to blame. But betrayal doesn't always come as a thunderclap. Sometimes it comes as a whisper so soft you almost think you imagined it. It was a winter evening. The windows were frosted white, the radiators clanked with tired heat, and I sat in my room writing an essay that I knew my teacher would praise. I heard my parents in the kitchen, their voices low, carrying through the thin walls. My name floated into the conversation. I froze. "She's useful at least," my mother said. "She makes us look good. People think we raised her right." My father chuckled, a rough sound. "Yeah, as long as she keeps winning prizes, people won't notice the rest." The rest? That word stung worse than anything. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it was too late. That night I lay awake, staring into the dark. Useful. A mask. A distraction. That was all I was to them. Not a daughter. Not someone to love. Just a convenient story they could tell. It was the first time I truly understood what betrayal felt like. Not knives, not fire, but the quiet knowledge that the people you live for don't see you at all. And still, I woke the next morning, went to school, and wrote another perfect test. Because I didn't know who I was without their shadow. But a seed had been planted. A dangerous one. When I was 18, I thought freedom would finally arrive. Graduation. University. A life that might belong to me. But chains don't vanish just because you move out. They travel with you, curled around your thoughts, your skin, your bones. At university, people liked me. Professors praised my essays. Classmates invited me to join study groups. To them, I looked like someone confident, driven, maybe even whole. They didn't know that every compliment I received was immediately packaged in my mind as a gift from my parents. Look, Mom. Look, Dad. I'm still useful. Every Sunday I called home. I would report my grades, the awards, the little victories. I waited for pride, for love. But my father's replies were blunt. Keep it up. My mother's tone was sharp, as if reminding me, don't mess this up. No warmth. No joy. Just pressure wrapped in thin paper. And then came the day I let the mask slip. I had failed a midterm. Not because I hadn't studied, but because I was exhausted, nights without sleep, a body trembling with stress. For the first time, I had nothing shiny to bring them. When I told my parents on the phone, there was a long silence. Then my mother's voice, cold as winter. So this is who you really are. I swallowed hard, but the words burned. My father muttered something about wasted potential. That night I broke down completely. My roommate found me curled on the floor, shaking, whispering apologies to no one. She held me, confused, asking why I cared so much. And I couldn't explain it, because how do you tell someone you're terrified of being unloved unless you're flawless? That was the night I realized. The mask I wore wasn't to impress the world. It was armor to survive my own family. But the cracks were spreading, and one day it would shatter. It happened the summer I came home after my second year of university. I thought maybe the distance had softened them, that maybe time apart had opened space for warmth. I carried hope in my suitcase like fragile glass. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling, the garden wild. My mother greeted me with pursed lips instead of a smile. My father barely looked up from the television. I tried as always. I cooked dinners. I asked about their health. I offered stories from school that might make them proud. For a few days, I almost convinced myself that we were a family. Then one evening over dinner it cracked. My father had been drinking, his eyes heavy, his voice sharp. Out of nowhere, he began to speak about me, not to me but about me. She thinks she's better than us now, he muttered. All those books, all that fancy talk. She'll forget where she came from. My mother didn't defend me. She laughed. She laughed. And then she added, maybe she already has. Maybe she was never really one of us. The words slammed into me. Never one of us. I put down my fork. My hands were trembling. For the first time in my life I answered back. I've done everything you ever wanted. I've broken myself trying to make you proud. And it was never enough, was it? The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. My father's face darkened. My mother's eyes turned cold like strangers. And in that silence I understood the truth. They didn't want me. They only wanted the version of me that served their pride. The puppet. The mask. The echo. That night, I packed a small bag and left the house. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't breathe there anymore. It was the first time I chose myself. And it felt like both freedom and death. I walked out with nothing but a backpack, a half-charged phone, and the echo of their words still ringing in my ears. Maybe she was never one of us. For days I wandered between friends' couches, train stations, libraries. I told everyone I was fine. That I just left home early for independence. But inside I was hollow, like someone had scraped out my chest and left an empty shell. The silence I once used as armor became unbearable. Without their house around me, without the constant struggle to earn approval, I didn't know who I was. I had lived my whole life as a reflection in someone else's mirror. Now the mirror was gone and I couldn't see myself at all. One evening I sat on a park bench watching families stroll by. Parents holding children's hands, laughing at small jokes, bending down to listen. A kind of love so casual, so natural it looked like breathing. And I thought, why not me? Why couldn't I have that? What did I do wrong? The tears came hot, unstoppable. I hated myself for crying in public, but I couldn't stop. Years of silence, years of swallowed pain, all spilling out under the fading streetlights. Then something strange happened. An old woman walking her dog paused by my bench. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer pity. She just looked at me with kind, steady eyes and said, "It's not you who is unworthy. It's them who never learned how to love. And then she walked away. I don't know why, but those words rooted themselves deep inside me. They felt truer than anything my parents had ever said. For the first time, a thought entered my mind like a fragile spark. Maybe I am not broken. Maybe I was simply born into the wrong soil. That night I decided I would stop trying to earn their love. I would start trying to discover my own. The wilderness around me was terrifying. But for the first time I felt a direction. The shift didn't happen in a single moment, but there was one night I'll never forget. The night I finally saw myself clearly. I had found a tiny studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a window that barely closed, but it was mine. The silence inside was different from the silence at my parents' house. It wasn't heavy with fear. It was raw, empty, waiting to be filled. One evening I sat on the floor surrounded by my old report cards, trophies, and certificates, the relics of my usefulness. I had carried them with me like holy artifacts, proof that I mattered. Proof that maybe my parents would finally say the words I'd craved all my life. But looking at them now, I saw them for what they really were. Receipts of my servitude. Paper masks I had worn until my own face disappeared. And then something inside me snapped, not like breaking but like unlocking. I began tearing them one by one. The gold medals clattered into the trash, the certificates shredded into snowflakes. My hands shook, my heart raced, but with each tear I felt lighter. By the time the floor was covered in scraps, I was laughing and crying all at once. I whispered into the quiet, I don't need to prove myself anymore. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was mine. That night, for the first time, I slept without fear of their judgment. And when I woke in the morning, I felt something new blooming in my chest, fragile, trembling, but real. Self-worth. It wasn't built on their approval. It wasn't built on perfection. It was built on me. And I knew then I would never go back. Freedom is not a single leap. It's 1,000 small steps into the unknown. At first, I didn't know how to live without their voices in my head. Whenever I made a decision what to eat, who to meet, whether to rest, I could hear echoes of my parents judging me. Lazy. Weak. Not enough. But each day I pushed a little further away. I began writing not essays for grades but journals for myself. The pages filled with anger, grief, questions I had never dared to ask. Then slowly they began to fill with dreams. Not theirs. Mine. I tried things I never would have allowed myself before. Painting, even though I was terrible. Dancing in my apartment, clumsy but free. Talking to strangers without rehearsing every word. It felt awkward, like learning to walk all over again. But with each stumble I discovered something new. I wasn't as fragile as they made me believe. I could fall and still get up. I could fail and still be worthy. There were setbacks. Nights when loneliness wrapped itself around me like chains. Days when their voices returned, whispering that I would never escape. But then I'd remember the old woman's words in the park. It's not you who is unworthy. It's them who never learned how to love. And I'd hold on. Slowly I built a circle of people who saw me. Not the perfect mask, not the obedient child, but me. Friends who laughed at my bad jokes, who stayed when I cried, who didn't demand perfection to stay by my side. It was messy. It was real. And it was mine. For the first time I wasn't just surviving. I was living. It was almost 2 years before I saw them again. Not because I wanted to, but because life has a way of circling back to old wounds. A cousin was getting married. And I knew avoiding the event would only feed more rumors. I had changed by then. I wasn't the trembling, approval-chasing child anymore. But still, as I stood outside the hall in my simple dress, my hands shook. When I walked in, the noise of laughter and music wrapped around me, and then I saw them. My parents. Sitting stiff at a table, their eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. My mother's mouth tightened. My father's brow furrowed. They hadn't changed. Not at all. Later, when the music softened, they cornered me. So, my father said, his voice laced with bitterness, you've been too proud to visit. I felt the old reflex rise, apologize, shrink, make myself small. But then something steadier took hold. I straightened my back. No. I chose to stay away. Because being near you was killing me. Their faces froze. My mother scoffed. After all we did for you? I met her eyes and for the first time didn't flinch. You didn't raise me. You raised an image. A tool to make yourselves look good. I deserved love. Not conditions. Not chains. The silence between us was sharp, a knife balanced on air. My father muttered something about ingratitude. My mother shook her head like I was lost forever. But here's the thing. For the first time, their words didn't sink into me. They slid off powerless. Because I finally knew the truth. My worth was not theirs to define. I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there, shadows of the power they once held over me. And as I stepped back into the music, into the laughter of cousins and friends, I felt lighter than I ever had before. Walking away from them that night felt like closing the final chapter of a book I had been forced to read since birth. For years I had thought freedom meant cutting ties in anger, shouting, proving, fighting. But real freedom came in silence, the kind not born of fear but of peace. The silence of knowing I owed them nothing anymore. The old voices still visit me sometimes. On quiet nights I still hear the echo. Not enough, not enough. But now I answer back. I tell that voice, I am enough. Even if no one claps, even if no one sees, I am still enough. And I believe it. I built a life where I no longer chase love as a prize to be won. My friends are not perfect, nor am I, but we stay because of choice, not obligation. I laugh louder now. I rest when I'm tired. I fail and I still wake up worthy. Sometimes I pass families on the street and feel a pang. A mourning for the love I never had. But then I remind myself, family is not only blood. Family is where love lives, where you are allowed to exist without masks. And slowly I am building mine. The house I grew up in may remain a house of echoes, but I no longer live there. Not in walls, not in memory. I carry a new home inside me. A home of warmth, of truth, of self. And when I look back now, I don't see a broken child who failed to win love. I see a survivor who learned how to love herself instead. That finally is enough.